I am very excited to invite my guest for today into this chat in just a minute. Dr. Ann Harbison is a leadership development expert who helps organizations thrive during times of turmoil, transition, and change. Her book, Never Waste a Crisis, published in the midst of the COVID pandemic, is a roadmap for navigating life's most difficult journeys. Sharing insights from her original research at Harvard to over 30 years of coaching leaders around the world, Ann offers life-changing strategies for transforming hardships into true wisdom, resilience, and grace. Her inspirational personal story has been featured in the New York Times, Dear Sugars podcast, Fox Sports News, and most recently on the Minneapolis TEDx stage. And so I am excited to welcome Ann to the podcast. Welcome back to the Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat podcast. Wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome in. So glad you are here. We are almost at the 300 episode mark, which is kind of mind-blowing and amazing to me that we have already reached that point. If you're new to the podcast, welcome in. I'm so glad this continues to grow, spread in all the exciting ways that it continues to do that. If you're one of the folks that have been with us from the very beginning, then so glad this continues to add value to your life and your work. My commitment to the listeners every time we gather for one of these is to hopefully the content we talk about allows you some time to step back in your own life, to hopefully have a little good oxygen breathed into you and some time to think about that temperature you're trying to set in your life, in your work. And hopefully this is a moment to maybe calibrate your own personal thermostat. Before I invite our guest in for today, if you'll do me the quick favor, of course, I keep being told you got to keep reminding people to rate the podcast 5 stars, of course, on whatever platform you're on. Leave an authentic review in your own words on whatever platform you're on. If any of these messages have any redeeming value in the world, I hope you will say something about it. And then lastly, every time you share the podcast episodes that resonate with you, with your team, your colleagues, friends, say, hey, let's give a listen to this, and then let's talk about what it means for us or our team. That's the way that these messages spread. So thanks to everybody that helps amplify those messages. I am very excited to invite my guest for today into this chat in just a minute. Dr. Ann Harbison is a leadership development expert who helps organizations thrive during times of turmoil, transition, and change. Her book, Never Waste a Crisis, published in the midst of the COVID pandemic, is a roadmap for navigating life's most difficult journeys. Sharing insights from her original research at Harvard to over 30 years of coaching leaders around the world, Ann offers life-changing strategies for transforming hardships into true wisdom, resilience, and grace. Her inspirational personal story has been featured in the New York Times, Dear Sugars podcast, Fox Sports News, and most recently on the Minneapolis TEDx stage. Ann and I were connected by a great friend of mine and my first professional mentor, John Ross. So shout out to JR out there for connecting us when he just said, hey, you guys just need to know each other. And that is awesome. And so I am excited to welcome Ann to the podcast.
Thank you, Jason. I am thrilled to have this conversation. And honestly, I cannot believe we weren't connected sooner.
Yeah. It's as JR was started to tell me that and started to tell me a little bit about you. He was, of course, glowing about you and how talented you are. And similarly was like, man, I can't believe I haven't thought about connecting you all earlier. So anyway, it's been great to get to know you and beginning that relationship with you, and certainly excited to share you and have you on the pod today.
You bet. Well, I when we first met just a couple weeks ago, I was just so taken by your work, and separate from John Ross, who I listened to his episode, and that was just a great one. And he is, boy, you talk about a talent magnifier, connector, attractor. He's very special in my life as well as a mentor and friend. But when I was learning more about your work, everything about it, about inviting leaders to reflect and act, and this whole idea of a thermostat. And I talk a lot about being on the balcony and on the dance floor. It just got me really inspired. And I have to tell you, how people have the NPR moments where they're sitting in their driveway, listening to a story. I started listening to your now almost 300 podcasts. And so I'd have to wait till I'd get to like a stoplight, and then I'd write down what I am now calling Jason's gems. So I just want to let you know that I've already inundated my clients with conversation is the currency of change, all these pieces. And so thank you. I think if I could cut and paste some of your mission, it's kind of what is driving my work in the world too. So.
That's awesome. Well, I'm honored to be written down anything that I've said. If it adds value to somebody, that's obviously the purpose and the point of all this. So thanks for sharing that. We're still getting to know each other, and certainly the listeners are getting to know you for the first time. So I like to start some of these chats with, tell us something about yourself that maybe somebody wouldn't normally know about you.
I think the biggest thing that struck me is, I'm somebody that's always wanted to write. Words are my love language. I didn't play dolls and nurse when I was a little girl. I played preacher. I'd get all the dolls set around. I had a message of inspiration, go out into the world. Always something to say. But writing has always been really difficult for me. And so, I've always wanted to write a book, thought about it. But it wasn't until COVID when I felt really compelled to put a message out there. But so now in a more public sense, and also because of a personal story, which I'll share as well, that's, how people see me is how can we, in our toughest moments when life has crumbled, what does it mean to get up out of the rubble? And so it is a privilege and an honor. It's a phrase I heard from you, but privilege and honor to share and live that message. I guess so. The bigger picture to know about me is I've been a leadership development junkie, my whole for 30 years of my life and career. And as I was reflecting on this, I almost feel like the Forrest Gump of leadership world, like not for my own whatever that I was bringing to the table, but at different points, I can go back to 1994. I feel like I've been in the room where it happened with different leadership thought leaders and have just been able, I'm now at an age where I just soak that up. And instead of always being the leader or the practitioner, the speaker, it's really cultivating that in others. And just really quickly, it started in 1994. I actually went to grad school. I'd come from business. I was at Procter & Gamble, and that was incredible leadership training very early. But in 94, I actually went to divinity school. Thought I was going to be a Unitarian minister. And within the first semester, knew that was not my domain of practice. The church, at least the progressive church, is still a grounding force for me and a big part of my life. But from the very first semester, I went from the divinity school to the Kennedy School of Government to do their standing room only leadership course. And that was with Ron Heifetz, who was my first big mentor and taught on his staff. And he had just come out with his kind of seminal first book, was called Leadership Without Easy Answers. And this was a time, it was the 7 habits and the 5 dysfunctions, and which are tools that I've used my whole career. I think there's just great, rich depth and truth in them. But Ron really introduced me to this digging deep and not taking shortcuts when it comes to exercising leadership. And it's not, leadership is a noun or leadership is a person. It is leadership as a calling, as an action, as a mobilizing others to help communities face their most difficult problems. So that just grounded my work, my dissertation. Fast forward to 2004, 10 years later, I joined Gallup. And this was right between when Don Clifton and Marcus Buckingham had published Now Discover Your Strengths. That was in, I think, 2001. And when Tom Rath, Don's grandson, published StrengthsFinder 2.0. So it was kind of in the room where that happened. Like, how can we get this message out further? How, our CEO, Jim Clifton, used to say, this is a stampede. Let's just make this idea and this. It's not an idea and a philosophy. It's the empirical evidence that when we tap into our most unique talents and then we hone them and we offer them and we call it aim it, tame it, name it, get those out in the world. That's really makes a difference. So being part of that practice group was really, really powerful. And I think this is really germane to your work and everything we're going to be talking about. It allowed me to take some just spiritual principles that I'd found really grounding and academic principles. But then, Gallup was really a driving force of taking behavioral economics, which is just hardcore. People are more emotional and irrational and deeply, imprinted with these impulses and desires and yearnings. And we'll take you on economics and mathematics and physics. This is not just the fluffy stuff. This is not just the soft skills. This is actually how people and communities are wired. And so to add that as another layer of this leadership work. And then, fast forward to 2014, I started my own practice, continuing to coach and facilitate. But that following year, 2015, is when we lost our 9-year-old son, Ben. And of course, there's no more traumatic and dramatic change than that experience. And so this last 10 years has been naming and claiming how sorrow and heartache and devastation also fits with joy and rebirth and learning and renewal. And I think the reason I've been willing to now share that message more publicly, I think pre-COVID, it was leadership expert to the world, grieving mother to, within my tight community. And, part of this idea of never wasted crisis is you do have these moments, right, where the world breaks open. Sometimes it's an erosion, in the tower tumbles, but sometimes it's an eruption. I'm here in Minneapolis right now. And I just mentioned pre-call that if we'd had this conversation on Monday, that was one thing, probably more shiny or thinking about leadership, a very, very first piece in mind. And we, of course, there was a school shooting at a Catholic school, and lost an 8-year-old and 10-year-old. And so I'm having this conversation with you 2 or 3 days later with the deep, deep reminder that all the organizational work and leadership work and mission and how these organizations change the economy, that is deep and profound and consequential. As is the deep, deep personal devastating losses that a family faces and how that affects the community. So I kind of feel like the calling for the rest of my career is making sure that both of those can be in the same space. So that's a lot more than something you may not have known about me in my little missions talk, but it was helpful for me to think about these big 10-year chapters that maybe at the time felt kind of, how do you go from divinity school to Kennedy School of Government, but you're from business? It felt a little disconnected. But with 30 years hindsight, boy, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I have been called to do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. And that's one, your own personal connection and personal tragedy is a part of your story.
Yeah.
And is absolutely a part of I can tell it even just in your voice, but in your face of what the heart of that is a part of the work that you do in the world. And you're absolutely right. The heartache that people are experiencing in Minneapolis and beyond right now, that is that reminder that human beings, no matter what the organization is, no matter what the grouping of people is around the world, whatever it is that they're there for, the mission or whatever they're trying to accomplish, human beings are the ones that are in it.
That's right.
And the baggage, the challenges, the emotions, the loss, the heartache, all of that is a part of it. And so I really appreciate you even sharing that with us. And it leads us into that, we live in a culture right now that, it's really easy to share the successes and the celebrations, and oftentimes, on social media, most of the things I share are about great things that are happening, as I'm a real human, and we all do that, but we celebrate things. We certainly recognize all the great things that are happening around us. But at the same time, we know that failures and or crisis and trauma and baggage that people have is all a part of the human experience, let alone the organizational experience. And so, when you in your book you talk about never wasting a crisis, tell us a little bit more about that. How do you define that, or give us a little bit of this never waste a crisis idea?
Well, the first time I heard that line was actually a minister in my 20s, and our church was shockingly going through some upheaval. Nothing too traumatic as I look back on it. I think it was about the hymnal or something.
Yeah. Sounds like a church. Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
It was, high stakes here. And she jokingly and lovingly said, okay, the waters have been stirred. People are, feeling kind of crunchy with each other. It's a time of turmoil for whatever reason. And as we know, it's never about the hymnals, right? There's always other things it's about.
The issue's not the issue.
That's right. The issue's not the issue. And it just captured my mind as that probably a 23, 24, 25-year-old. I think historically it comes from Churchill about when you're going through hell, you better keep going. There's another line, Robert Frost, the best way out is through, so it resonated with me. And then in grad school, I was not just studying leadership. I was really studying this idea of transformational learning. Like, what's learning where we're not just gaining knowledge? Like literally informational learning is pouring more in the container. And this idea of transformational learning is you're taking on challenges and questions and messiness that actually shapes the shape of the container. Like you're actually expanding your capacity to know. So part of crisis is something that is structurally challenging you. You're not just adding information or demonstrating a skill. The very fundamental foundation of how you learn and what you're even thinking about gets cracked open, and so what are you going to do? Like, you can't go back. A crisis, the Greek root of crisis is literally the point of decision. So like you're at a crossroads and you're in a medical crisis. What happens next will send you on a path of healing or demise. An identity crisis. You're either going to emerge as a healthy adolescent, adult, mid-age, or you still continue to struggle. So understanding crisis, and the words I think really matter. Crisis is a potential for growth is really important because by definition, it's something we didn't ask for. People may be stirring up trouble and drama and looking for it, but we truly don't ask for crisis, right? We find ourselves as the recipient of crisis. So then the question is, what are you going to do? The language about failure is interesting, though. I'll talk about that. I mentioned I heard it in a sermon in my 20s, and then in my 30s, I was a grad student, and I was looking at how did the great, great leaders experience failure? And this, to your point about success, I was doing this at Harvard. It was the Kinney School of Government. And I did it there instead of the business school. This was my research because it didn't just have business, professionals. It had journalists, these Neiman Fellows. It had doctors who were studying medical ethics and public health. It had politicians. It had, it was just a great group of professional people that were very interested in success. You don't end up at Harvard without a pretty shiny resume. But I'm a qualitative researcher, which is all about stories and meaning making. And as I started to hear their stories, I was really studying success. The really interesting stuff was what's the shadow side or what's the messy side that didn't make it on the resume. And so I just started with that question, how do we experience failure? How does the language get in the way? And so I found actually talking about turmoil, crisis, disappointment, a more fruitful language than failure. Mm-hmm. Although the name of the dissertation did end up being Transforming Failure. And it was the idea of failure can actually transform us because it takes us to places we would not have asked for. It forces us to confront realities of just the humanity of who we are and all that messiness. And it propels us to rebuild. And so, that was my 30s. And then later on, I decided, wow, that's a story that could really help us in COVID.
Yeah. And you think about these, at least where my mind goes, is this dramatic crisis, like COVID certainly was that, where nobody, especially at first, knew what was happening and people are literally losing their lives. But then there's this thing that we can't see, but yet we see the impact it's having on people. And so like the obvious crisis, what just happened in Minneapolis the other day, crisis, like, oh my goodness. And then there are all of the little things that people are experiencing, I think, in the underbelly of their life. The word failure, I think, is a powerful one of all of those ways in which somebody might be feeling like they're failing right now.
Yeah.
Or experiencing that in their job, in their relationships, in their, something they tried that just didn't go the way that they hoped it would. And yet there's transformation that can happen even in those smaller ways. I'm wondering, I see it as like this spectrum in my head of this trauma and crisis on one side of it that's just, yes, smacks you and is right in front of you. And then there's these tiny ones that we experience. I'm wondering any kind of mental, I'm putting myself in the mind of a listener right now who'd be saying, what are those kind of mental tips or like things as I'm trying to transform myself through a failure?
Yeah.
What would you share? But before we dive into that topic, let's take a break. Let's pause for a second and we'll be right back. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I'm putting myself in the mind of a listener right now who'd be saying, what are those kind of mental tips or like things as I'm trying to transform myself through a failure? What would you share?
Great question. Whatever you're struggling with right now, whatever you name it, crisis, loss, failure, disappointment, disaster, at the fundamental essence of all of that is loss, which is honestly grief. It's you've lost something that you used to hold important, maybe life-giving, whether it's a relationship, a job, image of success. So loss is part of the human condition, as we know. You can't have a gain without a loss. Human development is about 2 steps forward, 1 step back, looking at a kid crawl and walk. I mean, it's the fundamental principle of nature, literally, human organisms, any natural organism. But a lot of time with loss, it becomes fear. And then we clutch on. So all of a sudden, our definition of success or our shiny resume or our social media presence is even more important to us because we can't tolerate the uncomfortable feelings of losing some shiny image. But loss can also be grounded in just feeling the pain that you deserve to feel. Like it's heartbreaking when you disappoint yourself. It's heartbreaking when someone leaves you. It's heartbreaking when you experience a disaster. But if we can tolerate that a bit and connect, that can be a path for growth and healing. And believe me, I am not a fan of things happen for a reason. I mean, you want to hear me go off. That's not what anyone in pain and loss and grief needs to hear. And there's no need to rush to put a shiny bow and meaning making on when you're in the midst of pain. But if you're feeling frustrated, all those words, failure, disappointment, it's really helpful to name the loss that you're experiencing. That's one. The second one, again, failure, crisis, they happen in 2 ways. They can happen because of an eruption. A plane hits a tower. a
Yep.
child gets hit by a truck, or, something horrible happens. You get fired, these moments that just erupt. But honestly, what more often happens is erosion. The tower crumbles because we didn't look at the infrastructure. We didn't take care of it. A marriage crumbles because we weren't doing a deep, sustaining, look about it. So that would be another question I would say is whatever turmoil you're experiencing now, was it an eruption, erosion? How was it both? Because I do think you don't want to relitigate the past and get drawn into the whys in a way that paralyzes you. But I think looking at, wow, what wasn't working anymore? What was not sustainable before can be really, really helpful. And then the most important principle is do not do this alone. We need a buddy system. It's great to have buddies in the successes of life, the celebrations of life, but man, it is non-negotiable when you're going through tougher times in life, organizational life, family life, certainly grief, loss, tragedy. And that's not just for the comfort and companionship. It's also so you can have a point of reality, because when we're in pain and heartache and grief, it's easy to get very, very distorted thinking. Either we totally take it on. This was all me. It was my fault. I could have done something. It's over responsibility, or it can go into catastrophizing. Now I can never trust anyone. Now my kids are always at risk. I got to go into hypervigilance, And so those types of distorted thinking that do keep people in a really painful, in organizations, in just a rut, in a painful place, a place of demise, actually, is because they don't get their thinking clarified and uplifted. And we do that by being in relationship and conversation with others.
Yeah, I think that language is super powerful, and it's making me think about an episode that I did, and with a lot of teams and organizations that I support. We talk about the fact that all of us as human beings, what we all carry mental baggage with us. And it's interesting the language you're using, because I did a whole episode about these 3 types of mental baggage, but one is an event, and that's the eruption that you're talking about. Something happens in our lives that's out of our control and happens to us, and then there's baggage we carry because of it. And I've shared on past episodes, when I lost both of my parents within a few years for differing illnesses and things. That's an event that happens to you in your life, and there's baggage, there's stress and burden that comes with that. Then there's a consequence, which that's the erosion piece of this, is that the something that we played a role in didn't go the way that we hoped it would. A project wasn't handled, a relationship that eroded. I really like that language. But then there's baggage or stress, anxiety that we carry because of it. And then lastly, maybe most significantly, are the narratives and the thoughts and the stories that we just continue to tell ourselves that oftentimes are not true. And, or we need to I love the name it, is like, hold on, let me name that thought that I'm having right now. And is that real? Or have I made up a story about myself or about somebody else? And am I perpetuating this, oh, that'll never work, in my own head?
Yeah.
And so I think that eruption and erosion language, I think is really, really wonderful. My listeners, I think will connect with that kind of idea. I'm struck in the midst of this conversation of the power or the importance that resilience plays in this. And I'm also seeing it not only again in crisis situations, but I'm seeing it just in the general world we're in right now, and within organizations, and with as much division and rates of change and disengagement with people. We've been in a very low trusting environment in many organizations. This idea of being resilient over a longer period of time, and how do we help kind of grow and transform in the midst of that? Where does the growth come from, coming out of that, the failure or that kind of journey of resilience that it requires?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, because as we get away from COVID, I'm asked to speak or talk much less about crisis and more just about, kind of as you come out and emerge, hopefully we have become stronger and more resilient. But another phrase that I don't find helpful is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like some things happen to people and they're more broken and they're more
totally.
That is just not true. They are more in pain. They are more isolated. They are more devastated. So just to assume that time will heal all wounds or what didn't kill you makes you stronger, that it just requires more of getting in the game. Again, not a solo sport, but growth requires action, cultivation. And I can tell we both love metaphors. I'm going to get back to the baggage metaphor because there's part of this that I can't not speak to the baggage, but talking about, I'll use the garden metaphor. Earth is scorched. Well, you got to retill the soil. You got to plant new seeds. You got to cultivate. You got to tend. I mean, when people ask, how am I even surviving as a grieving mom, much less in many ways thriving, as our family had to rebuild, we expanded our family. Ben, the son we lost, is still just a vital part of every day. We laugh much more than we cry. But boy, that's been an active path, so let me just kind of tease that out a little bit. I do think, and again, thinking really practically, if you're in the midst of a crisis, you do not want to hear about growth, resilience, all that. It is just not helpful. Right. I mean, you are trying to get out of bed. You are trying to brush your teeth. You are trying to get through a conversation without crying. You're trying to get your finance. I mean, it's just so not helpful. It's almost demeaning, so the possibility of growth, the evidence, sometimes I would use the phrase in the dark days of, I don't feel hope, but I'm going to borrow hope. I don't feel it. I don't even know if I believe it from my life right now because the pain is too deep, but look at that family and look at that marriage and look at that business. Like there is something about borrowing hope. You can hold that as a truth without feeling it, so that's one piece. Another piece that even in the midst of crisis, and to be honest, I'm getting phone calls this week. This will make me emotional thinking about this 8 and 10-year-old Met family, what they're going through right now.
Yeah.
And, 10 years ago, that was me with the 9-year-old, certainly not because of violence, but I'm thinking they are living the worst, deepest, darkest days of their life. And I will say, for all of us, I'd sometimes call it the pain Olympics. We don't want to debate who's in more pain. It's just a fruitless rabbit hole to go down. But to know that when you're in pain and when you've been devastated for whatever reason, a question that I have found incredibly grounding is what is still true? At your darkest hour, there are still things that will be true. The meaningful relationships in your life, your core talents, your values, meaningful work, things that sustained you and maybe you even took for granted. And that's why, to switch over to the leadership journey and organizational health, that's why you don't wait until you're in a crisis to cultivate good things, deep values, ethics. That you're doing that work all along so that the stable foundation is there to serve you. Whatever served you well before a crisis will save your life during and after a crisis. So those good things, I think, are the source of resilience. So resilience doesn't just come from us getting back on the saddle, after a crisis. It's actually revisiting, reaffirming, just embracing wholeheartedly the good things that were in our life, even before. And that is the role of gratitude. There's nothing I'm grateful for about what happened to Ben. There's nothing I'm grateful for, but I am for sure grateful for the systems, relationships, positive forces around me that have helped, sustain me.
Sorry, that's beautiful. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's the Navy SEALs, who have the saying, they say when crisis hits, that you don't rise to the level of the occasion.
Yeah.
Which is, people think, you got something comes up and you just rise to the level of the occasion. They say you don't rise to the level of the occasion. You fall to the level of your training.
That's exactly.
And so what you're describing is, again, what we try to do. And I'm thinking of the countless number of organizations that, especially coming out of COVID, that I was working with years leading up and through that, of then saying, man, we wouldn't have navigated those waters like we did if we hadn't been training for years in developing our cultural thinking, acting, and interacting, and clarity around what is that thermostat, and what are we trying to calibrate, and what, why do we do what we do, and what are those values that we want to guide us. As we aligned and trained for years for that, when the eruption happened, we didn't have to spend any energy trying to figure out. We'd already done the work. Now it was just, all right, what we know the temperature we're trying to set, so let's go set it. Boy, and that doesn't mean it's easy.
That's right. I'm telling you, this is such a fundamental first principle of organizational life, family life. Like James Clear in his work with habits, he says, we don't rise.
I just took a walk with James a couple of weeks ago.
Wow. I'd like for some of that discipline to rub off on me, but I tell you, if we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the levels of our habits. So
that's right.
And so that's just this idea. Something magical doesn't happen. You don't get a piece of information or go to a keynote or have a retreat and like just something like you've been hit by fairy dust. Those things are to lift up and hopefully codify and encourage you for lessons that you then just practice every day. And there's a real difference in like ideas that we get and inspire us, and then experiences that we internalize. So for example, firefighters, which I talk a lot about in my book, my brother-in-law is a fire chief, and I've been able to witness, vicariously in his career and the type of training, the type of situations, he faces. And in some of the after action reviews is what most corporations would call it. Doctors would call it the postmortem, when you're going back to say what's wrong. And that's a very important analytical, process to go through to see what were the cracks in the system that led to that disaster outcome. But, firefighters will sometimes go back to the scorched earth, literally go back and walk through the fields or walk through the rubble. And it's that they don't just intellectually analyze what could have been different if we had this hose or water pressure, but some of the memory, like literally cellular memory, the smell and that, it gets them into a deeper source of knowledge within them and a deeper source of wisdom. This sounds kind of cuckoo, but it's actually not. This is why I love the emerging of science and all these things saying like, no, there's wisdom there. And I'd say the same thing when you talk about where does resilience come from? It's not just from revisiting our mistakes, analyzing them, coming up with New Year's resolutions, reading a new book. It's from settling into the deeper wisdom. Like, when was I truly honest? When did I avoid the discussion that needed to be had? It's the courage we bring to our reflection.
Yeah.
And the feeling of, wow, that was really painful. I wonder if I just sat with that a little longer, if I could have gotten to the other side instead of going for the easy fix.
Yeah, what it makes me think about is, again, what we talk about a lot about in organizations. And certainly if you pull up any, LinkedIn article or something in the world right now about organizations, it's going to say, hey, you better have a great culture. But oftentimes we don't define, well, what does that mean? And then, okay, we've got to have a great one. So what is it we begin to do? And so what is the kind of tenets of culture shaping, which we dive into and talk about. But what you're also going to see layered in there is, in order to do that with this world that we're in right now, and I would say we've always been, but the world we're in now, is that we're going to have to raise our level of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And part of that is recognizing what is it we know about ourselves. And so the personal reflection, what do I know about it? I'm going to connect some of the dots between the strengths work that you mentioned earlier. Is like, do I even understand my strengths? And can I come into a room and know what I might bring to the table, but also do I understand and can I recognize what I'm thinking and feeling and experiencing in that moment? But then also, can I look across the table and around the room, and do I know your strengths? And do I know what you might bring to the table? And can I read the temperature of what you might be thinking, feeling, experiencing? And then use that awareness to set a temperature. I'm interested in kind of your the emotional intelligence side of not only leveraging our strengths, but helping us kind of transform ourselves through failure is a moment by moment effort.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I want to make sure this is really practical for whoever's listening, whether you're in a crisis or not. So if life is going great for you right now, I still have some really practical suggestions, for what you should be paying attention to. That's the whole purpose of the origin of resilience, right? So when you talk about emotional intelligence, one of the things I love about the StrengthsFinder tool, or the Clifton Strengths now, is that it's not just about emotional intelligence, it's an emotional lexicon. It's a talent lexicon. And there is a power of the words. So we know that when kids only know mad, sad, glad, that's kind of about the range that they express it. They're either really mad or really happy, and as kids learn, like, I'm frustrated, or I'm curious, or I'm lonely, or I'm, and this is on the positive and negative side, and this applies for leaders, adults, corporate language. If we can just expand our emotional lexicon, along with our talent lexicon, we start to see people in their fullness and in their experience. And I mean, this applies to like customer engagement studies. Like, is this person like irritated because they're in a bad mood? Or are they irritated because they really believe in my brand and they've had great experiences? And now, like, I failed them and they're mad enough to have a conversation with me about it. I'll take that any day from somebody that just, I can go to your store, the other store. I don't care less. That's apathy. Yeah. So I'll take crankiness over apathy if I'm willing to stay around and listen to the story, right? So I'd say as a person and as organizations, it's the emotional lexicon about the true experience. And then Clifton Strengths, the talent lexicon is just profound. Yep. And I'll give another example of that. So my natural talents that I've hopefully cultivated over time, and Clifton Strengths would say, is ideation, communication. And so for me, even in, for sure in 30 years of my career, but even in my darkest moments over time grieving and how do I want to bring that in the world, it has been about communicating and ideating around the experience of loss. Yep. And so it's been natural for me to be fairly public, and for my husband as well. And our family's kind of an extroverted family. Anyone that knows us is laughing right now, like, yeah. So, other people grieve very, very privately. And that doesn't mean there's not a lot happening. But those two principles about communicating and what's the deeper value and emotion and intelligence, it's about listening and connecting and describing. And then ideating, what could this mean? How could I frame this differently? What are the things I could do that might comfort or challenge me? That's not only been the basis, I'm really simplifying that. That's been a basis of a really vital 30-year career. And it was also the lifelines for how ultimately grieving and healing happened for me. It wasn't conversation and a TED Talk and sharing with others. So that's just a really a grounding and practical piece. The second thing I'll say is watch out for toxic positivity. That's become kind of a overused phrase in the last couple of years, but I think it comes from the root of leaders wanting to be motivational and positive and optimistic. Yep. So this is for leaders, one of the very, very practical advices I give. Like, boy, things fall apart. One, what is still true? Yep. Your values, your character, the talent, the people, that's all still true. And then the second one is don't shortcut pain. Don't try to convince people it's going to be okay. Don't try to cheerlead people that are like stumbling on the ground. Like, look at gains and losses. Look at joy and sorrow. And to do that, you have to be human. When you're in crisis, you do not need heroes. A white horse and a cavalry and everybody else could come in right now and I'm on the floor. I wouldn't even know how to accept their help. I'd be like, go on, carry on. So you have to get off the horse. You have to put down the white hat. You have to like lay in the ground. And this is, sounds dramatic. I'm using a dramatic, metaphor, but I'll show you what that looks like for organizations. During COVID, once I spoke to 900 managers virtually in India. And at the time, this was a Fortune 20 company. There was not a single manager that had not had death of someone on their team, a family member, or their own family. They were at a 5% vaccination rate at the time. So this was early COVID. Yep. And, and this was something that had been the ultimate corporate client for me, right? We had not talked about grief, loss, compassion. Those were kind of new words, but going back to our personal story, when Ben died, which happened very suddenly, our daughter was going, 6 weeks later, going back into 8th grade. And one of the things I said to her is, you've had this very public tragedy and our whole community is suffering. But I have to tell you, every person in your school or teacher, they're having some heartache that they're carrying, and again, we don't need to compare this person's dog died. That doesn't compare to you losing your brother, but everyone's carrying something. And I think what COVID did is it kind of lifted the veil because we saw people's something more up close. It was just a given that somebody in your company and your team sitting next to you, if not you yourself, was experiencing pain. So show up as a human, not as a hero. That would be another early piece. And then that'll keep you from going into false positivity and cheerleading.
Yeah.
Something as a parent and honestly as a coach, I always think about when somebody's struggling in front of me, I have to think, do they need to be heard? They need, to vent. Do they need to be helped? Okay, they're asking for advice. Or do they need to be hugged? And maybe not literally, but just held, with compassion. So that sounds simplistic, but that's actually really profound. I think about how can I take what I've gone through, everything I've learned, and just in a very practical way, share with leaders and individuals. Be human, not a hero. Allow for joy and sorrow, loss and gain. And just know people are carrying things. And you don't have to solve a problem. You just may be there to listen and create presence.
I love it. Your words are very aligned with what we talk about, certainly on many of the episodes here, but I did a whole episode about positive leadership and redefining, and I talk a lot with a lot of teams and organizations around what positive leadership is not. It's not puppy dogs and ice cream and just trying to hide that challenges we're facing, or everything will just stay positive. Everything will be better. But positive leadership is actually being able to name the things that aren't perfect. Yeah. And to name the challenges we're facing and still being optimistic about the future that you can create together. That might take time.
I'm a fan of that episode, by the way. I'm like, not the footnotes, but I'm like hustling. So it's like I finally found the college course I needed, and it's like senior year spring. I'm trying to but one just thing that's helpful in my mind to think about is exercising positive leadership is about meaningful outcomes, right? So the positive impacts you're trying to create. One strategy is to demonstrate positivity. Another strategy may be to be a provocateur, ask a tough question. Another strategy may be to pour a bunch of resources in it. So there's different strategies to have a positive outcome.
Yep.
But leaders get confused thinking that equates to positivity all the time. And no, you get a much bigger toolkit than that.
That's right. And this is fabulous, and I could literally do this all day, but I want to stick to the time that our listeners are allowing two of us to chat. But this has been awesome, and so many great things in there. And I'm going to walk away from this conversation with a lot that I'm thinking about. But one of the phrases you said, this idea of borrowing hope, is going to stick with me because I recognize that in my own life. And I certainly recognize that in different teams and organizations that I support, where sometimes you got to borrow some hope. And that helps transform whatever your experience you're in. So thank you for sharing and being with us. And I look forward already to our next conversation sometime.
Well, I love that. And just as a closing thought, I told you I'd mention the baggage piece, some of the work that you've done that's really impacted me. I think the baggage that we bring into the event, the erosion, is about the story we're telling ourselves.
Yep.
Right? The baggage of what we've been taught. And so I would just say, in any of these topics, whatever you're struggling with, whatever you're hopeful for, you can reframe the story you're telling.
Yep.
And that's ultimately, I think, what engaged leadership is all about.
Awesome. Well, Anne, thanks for being with us. For anybody listening, you want to learn more about Anne or her book, Never Waste a Crisis, we'll put some of that in the show notes so that you can find that as a resource to you. And I'll just say keep up the great work. And I look forward to, as I said, our next conversation out there. For everybody, all listeners, I just say, again, hopefully today's conversation breathed a little oxygen into you. And hopefully it gave you some things to think about and to name just where you are right now. and to maybe hopefully have a little bit of a calibration of the thermostat to say, okay, what might the next response be for me? And when we kind of bring out that connection with other people, and when we truly honor that in ourselves and in other people, and we bring our strengths to the situation, sometimes we might need to borrow some hope, but eventually we will put one foot in front of the other. And for anybody that's out there struggling right now with anything, and certainly there's so much happening in the world right now that is a crisis, know that the people are I hope that you feel the people around you that are supporting you and with you in spirit and walking beside you along the way. So thanks to everybody for listening today. Again, I'll just invite you, hopefully that this is one that you'd like to share with people around you. Hopefully this is one that you'd rate and bring your own words to help amplify this message, to write a review or whatever that might be. But again, thanks for being with us today. Check out the show notes to learn more. And I'll remind us of one last thing, and that is to step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.